The sun was sinking low, its last red light bleeding across the desert like a wound refusing to close. The air was dry, bitter with dust and old smoke, and the land stretched in every direction without mercy, just rock, sand, and the faint, ghostly trails of wind. Samuel sat astride his horse, his back bent, his eyes hollow beneath the brim of a sweat-stained hat. His throat burned with thirst, but he did not reach for the canteen. Some part of him, buried deep and worn thin, felt he did not deserve it. The war had ended for most men, but not for him. His orders had come like a nail hammered into a coffin. Hunt the Apache raiders, bring back proof, make the frontier safe again. He had seen the faces of the men who gave those orders, clean and unscarred, their boots never dusted by desert miles. They had spoken of duty. Samuel had nodded, though duty was the one thing that still bled in him. A hawk circled overhead, silent and patient. Somewhere below, a coyote cried a long, lonesome sound that stretched across the plain like a prayer left unanswered. Samuel rode on, his horse limping slightly, each step a reminder of distance and pain. In the distance, mountains rose like black teeth, and he thought of graves. He had buried enough men to know that the ground remembered everything. By nightfall, the wind had turned cold. He made camp by a dry riverbed, the stars spread thin and pale above him. He did not light a fire. Fire could be seen. Fire meant hope. He had long ago learned to move without it. As he sat, hands trembling, he took from his coat a folded scrap of paper, the letter from his commanding officer, edges torn and soft from sweat. Beneath the inked words was another, written in a different hand, faded from time and handling. Do not forget who you were before the killing. He had no recollection of writing it. Or maybe it wasn't written for him at all. He slept with one hand on his rifle. When he woke, it was not the sun but the sound of movement that stirred him, a quiet rustle, soft as breath. His eyes opened to find her standing a few paces away, barefoot in the sand, her dark hair tangled by wind. For a moment he thought she was a dream, one of those strange, half-forgotten spirits the old men spoke of, the ones who walked the land between vengeance and mercy. But the look in her eyes was too real, too alive. She held a bow, not drawn, but ready. Neither spoke. The silence between them was its own language, raw and uncertain. He could see that she was young, though not a child. Her dress was worn, patched with pieces of cloth in earth, tones that blended with the desert. Her gaze did not waver. She saw the rifle, the badge on his chest, the pale skin that marked him enemy. Still, she did not move. I ain't here for you, he said finally, voice low, cracked with dust. Not unless you give me reason. Her lips pressed together, the faintest tremor passing through her jaw. Then, slowly, she lowered the bow. The arrow fell soundlessly into the sand. Samuel exhaled, the sound harsh in the still air. He didn't know why he felt relief. She should have run, or shot him. Instead, she turned away, started walking toward the dry riverbed where a few dead branches lay scattered. Her steps were quiet, careful. He watched her gather them, her movements precise as ritual. She returned with the wood and set it in a small circle of stones. Struck flint. The spark caught. Firelight spilled across her face, and for the first time he saw it, her weariness, her hunger, her courage carved fine as bone. The flame flickered in her eyes like a memory she refused to let die. He should have stopped her. Fire meant danger. But he didn't move. He only watched as she pulled a small piece of dried meat from her satchel, broke it in half, and wordlessly set one half on a flat stone beside him. They ate without speaking. The night pressed close, alive with sound, the crack of burning wood, the faint rustle of unseen creatures, the distant cry of wind through mesquite. For the first time in many months, Samuel felt the weight of silence, not as a burden, but as something fragile and necessary. When he finally looked at her again, she was staring into the fire. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that made him think of forgiveness, though he could not imagine what kind. He wanted to ask her name, but the words caught like dust in his throat. Instead, he said quietly, "You shouldn't trust me." Her eyes lifted, dark and calm. "I do not," she said. It was the first sound of her voice, soft, low, and steady, like the wind before rain. He nodded, the faintest ghost of a smile touching his lips. Good. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows on the sand, and for a long time neither spoke again. Subscribe to witness how even the condemned may rise into life again. Morning came cold and colorless, a pale light spreading across the desert like breath over glass. The fire had burned to ash, and a thin wind scattered what was left. Samuel stirred from uneasy sleep, his bones stiff, his body sore from years of riding and regret. The woman was gone. For a moment, a hollow panic rose in him, a strange ache he couldn't name. Then he saw her silhouette in the distance, kneeling near the dry riverbed, washing her hands in the sand as if to erase something that clung to her skin. He watched her in silence. The world around them was empty, but not dead. The sky stretched wide, endless, painted with the faint blush of dawn. Somewhere, far off, a horse neighed. He thought of pursuit, of soldiers who would follow his trail, who would do their duty better than he had done his. She stood, turned, and walked back to him. Her expression carried no fear, only a tired resolve, as if she had lived too long with danger to bother naming it anymore. "I have to go north," he said. His voice felt strange in the morning stillness. "There's a fort a few days' ride from here. That's where my orders lead." She did not answer. Her gaze followed the horizon, the mountains fading blue in the distance. "North," she said finally, her voice low. "There is no water there." "Then we'll find some," he said before realizing what he'd said we. She tilted her head, her dark eyes narrowing. "You will not shoot me? If I wanted to, I would have." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. The smallest of gestures, but it felt like a choice. She gathered her bow, her satchel, and began walking beside his horse as he mounted. Her steps were sure, unhurried. He thought of asking why she didn't ride, but something told him she wouldn't accept the offer. They moved in silence. The desert changed with the light. What had seemed lifeless at night now shimmered with color. Cactus flowers bloomed faintly pink against the dust, and lizards darted across the ground like whispers. Samuel felt the weight of the rifle against his shoulder, the badge beneath his coat, the burden of every order he'd ever followed. By noon, heat pressed down like a hammer. He dismounted to walk beside her. The horse snorted softly, tail flicking against flies. They shared the last of the canteen, a few bitter swallows of warm water. She took only a sip, then handed it back. "You got a name?" he asked. After a pause, she said, "Nolly." The word carried an accent, rounded and quiet, like something meant to be spoken only once. He nodded. "Samuel." She did not repeat it, but he saw her glance toward him, as though tucking the name somewhere safe. As they walked, he found himself studying her, not the way men study women, but as one survivor studies another. The calluses on her hands, the way she scanned the horizon every few moments, the faint scar beneath her chin, pale against her skin. She carried herself like someone who'd lost much but refused to bow to it. By the second day, they found a trickle of water in a shaded ravine. She showed him how to catch the coolest pools, scooping with her hands, her movements careful, reverent. When he thanked her, she looked up, eyes glinting in the dusk. "You do not owe thanks for water," she said. "It belongs to no one." That night, they camped beneath a canyon wall. She built the fire this time without words. He watched her hands, steady and patient. The light traced the lines of her face, cheekbones sharp, mouth soft but set with quiet strength. When the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke and horses, Samuel stiffened. Nally noticed before he spoke. She rose slowly, her hand on her bow. "Riders," she murmured. He listened, heard it too, the distant clatter of hooves. "Could be soldiers," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Yours?" He did not answer. His chest tightened with the realization. If it was his own men, they would not care about the woman beside him. They would see an enemy. And if he hesitated, if he spoke her name instead of her crime, they'd see him as one too. Nolly's eyes searched his face. "Will you give me to them?" The question hit like a blade. For a long time he didn't speak. The fire crackled, its light small and trembling in the dark. "No," he said finally, voice rough as gravel. "I won't." She studied him, something unreadable passing between them. Not trust, not yet, but a shift, small and deep, like the first crack of thaw in frozen ground. When the riders passed, their torches distant and ghost-like, Nolly lay awake, her eyes fixed on the stars. Samuel watched her from across the fire, thinking how strange it felt to want to keep someone safe again. He had not known that feeling in years. The night stretched long. Coyotes called. The fire died slow. Before dawn, she whispered something into the air, a word he did not understand. But her tone made him feel it was meant for both of them. At first light, a thin frost bowed the sage, and breath from the horse hung like a pale veil before melting into nothing. She rose without sound and checked the snare she had set in the dark. A rabbit waited there, still and limp, its fur rimed with dew. She moved with a gentleness that made the moment feel like prayer. Samuel watched her clean the animal with a flake of chert she carried at her hip. She worked toward the grain of muscle, not against it, and when she finished, she wrapped the meat in cloth and set the bones aside with careful order, as if even the refuse of living deserved a place. He remembered a winter back on the plains, the year before the killing truly began. A small farmhouse, a roof patched with tar, a mother humming as she braided his sister's hair. He had been a different man then, all belief and shine, a boy who thought duty meant walking in a straight line toward whatever light was put before him. The memory came like a door opening on a room gone cold. He shut it quick. They traveled north through a day of brittle sunlight. Where the sand gave way to broken rock, she taught him the feel of shade hidden inside shadow. He had known trails by maps and orders, by charcoal marks on paper that never showed thirst. She showed him by the lay of lichen and the tilt of yucca spears, by the hush when birds fled a draw that held coyote. When the wind came hard, they leaned into it together, heads down, and the horse followed like an old priest keeping pace with a procession. By midday they reached a stand of cottonwoods around a seep that looked like a bruise on the earth. He wanted to rush the water. She stopped him with a look. They waited in silence until the ground settled and the surface cleared. She drank first, cupping her hands, then stepped aside. He went to his knees and let the cold bite his teeth. Afterward they sat back to back under the trees, and the warmth of her shoulder through the coat surprised him with its quiet kindness. In the long hours, she began to speak a little more. She told him of her grandfather who had been taken far and made to wear another man's name, who came back lean as wire and laughed like a creek in spring. She told him the old man had said a person is a bundle of fires, and you feed the one you choose. Samuel listened and kept his own stories mostly folded. When he did share, it came out scattered. A father who read from a leather book every morning. A tiny cross his mother kept in a tin. The dream of buying land along a river and planting rows of cottonwood cuttings until the wind had to sing around them. He did not know why he said that last thing. It had been buried so long it did not feel like his. She looked at him sideways and nodded once, as if she understood that a tree could be a vow. Toward evening they came upon a burned wagon, its wheels canted into the ruts like broken wrists. Buzzards lifted slow at their approach. The stink spoke the rest. Samuel swallowed and walked the circle. He found boot prints, small and many, soldiers by the pattern, and other sign too. A single bead, blue, caught in the crusted wheel grease. She saw it when he did. Her face did not change, but her eyes went far away, as if she could see each moment that had brought the ruin and would not blink until she had looked at all of them. He said, "It is not your people in this. The way the debris lay, the cuts, the waste. This was not hunger. This was a message." She crouched and touched the scorched earth with 2 fingers. Long ago, she said, men who did not know the land tried to bend it to their use. They learned a little. They decided it was enough. He felt the words like a hand pressed to a fevered brow. He remembered the letter in his coat. Hunt them, bring proof, make the frontier safe. The badge inside his pocket felt like a stone he had to carry or drown. When they made camp, the sky went bruised and purple and everything smelled of ash. He took first watch and she slept, her bow within reach, her hair a dark spill on the blanket. He thought of riding to the fort at first light and giving her a head start, a chance to vanish into her own country. He thought of lying and saying the trail had gone cold. He thought of the men he would have to face, their eyes bright with the surety that comes from not seeing what you have seen. He tried to picture the cost. He could not fix a number to it. It felt like counting stars with burned fingers. Near midnight, the horse tossed its head. He stood and moved into the dark with the rifle easy against his hip. The night had a different texture now, a roughness that meant hoof and boot, not deer. She woke without his calling and slid to her feet. They listened together. The sound came from the east. Not many. 3, perhaps, then a pause, then one more, limping. He felt the old training rise in him, the way a river knows where it once ran. They could hide in the wash, he whispered. She weighed the thought, then shook her head. If they are yours, the wash is a trap for us. If they are not yours, the wash is a trap for them. There was no judgment in her voice, only the clear naming of the path before them. He said, "I will speak first." She gave him a look that held both doubt and a hard respect. "Do not lie to yourself," she said. "Your mouth can lie to them. Your hands cannot lie to you." The riders came into view at the rim of the starlight, shapes cut out of the dark. Samuel stepped forward and raised an empty hand. His other stayed near the rifle, not touching it. A voice called his name, low and careful. He knew that voice. It belonged to a sergeant who had once shared a winter tent with him, who had told jokes about river towns and taught him a slower way to breathe when the shakes came after a fight. Samuel answered. The sergeant rode closer and saw the small circle of camp, the woman by the embers, the horse, the single bedrolls. The sergeant's face changed, not to anger first, but to sorrow, as if he were looking at a hill he had to climb again, though his legs were already failing. "Orders?" the sergeant said. The word fell like gravel. Samuel stood very still. The night held its breath. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with dust and memory, and Samuel could taste iron on his tongue. The sergeant sat his horse a few paces away, the beast shifting beneath him, nostrils flaring at the scent of smoke. The man's coat was the same gray they had once worn in winter along the Rio Grande, stiff with sweat and wear. His face was older, his eyes clouded with something that wasn't quite hate. "You're a long way off your trail," the sergeant said. His tone was even, almost kind, which made it worse. "Command's been looking for you, said you hadn't sent word." Samuel's mouth felt dry. He nodded once, careful. Trail ran cold. The sergeant's gaze moved past him to Nolly, who stood half in shadow, half in firelight. Her bow hung at her side, but her spine was straight, her chin lifted. She met the soldier's stare without flinching. "You found her," the sergeant said. "She ain't what they said," Samuel replied. "They never are," the sergeant murmured. His horse pawed the ground. "Still, you know the order." Samuel felt the words before they were spoken. "Bring proof." That meant her hair, or her death, or something else men could weigh and measure. The sergeant sighed. "Don't make me write this down ugly, Sam. Let's just finish what started. She don't need to hurt. We've both seen enough hurting." Nolly did not move, but her hand tightened on the bow. The firelight caught her cheek, the faint glisten of sweat and ash. Samuel stepped between them, not out of bravery, but something smaller, an instinct born of too much guilt to let one more thing break. "She's coming with me," he said. The sergeant's jaw tightened. "You'd throw your life to the wind for one of them?" "One of them," Samuel repeated, and the sound of it made him sick. He thought of the wagon burned to bone and metal, of her quiet hands setting snares, her careful prayers for water. "You don't see what's right in front of you anymore, do you?" The other soldiers shifted in their saddles. One spat into the dust. Another raised his rifle halfway before the sergeant stilled him with a hand. "You're making this hard," the sergeant said. Samuel felt the wind move through the cottonwoods. It whispered through the dry leaves like voices from a half-remembered dream. He thought of his father's worn Bible, of words he could no longer quote but somehow still felt. He thought of all the graves he'd left nameless. He said softly, "Then it was meant to be hard." The first shot cracked like a whip. Nally ducked, loosing an arrow that flew true and sharp. One of the riders fell from his saddle, crying out once before the earth took him. Samuel raised his rifle, the motion as old as breath, and fired. Smoke filled the air. The sergeant's horse reared, screaming. For a moment, Samuel saw only flashes of light, dust, and sound, the terrible clarity of battle that had once thrilled him and now hollowed him out. When the noise died, the desert was quiet again. 2 horses had fled. One man lay still. The sergeant knelt, clutching his side, the dark bloom of blood spreading beneath his hand. Samuel went to him. The man's eyes lifted, wide and wet. "You were a good soldier," he said. "You should have stayed that way." Samuel knelt beside him. "Maybe I was never good." The sergeant tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. He looked past Samuel to Nolly, who stood with her bow lowered, her face unreadable. "Get gone," he rasped, "before the next patrol finds what's left of this." Samuel nodded once. He wanted to thank him, but the words would not come. He watched the man's eyes go glassy, then close. The wind took his last breath and scattered it across the sand. They buried him with the others. No markers, no prayers. Just stones piled in silence. When it was done, Nolly looked to Samuel. "You cannot go north now." He shook his head. "No." "Then where?" He looked toward the west, where the horizon glowed faintly with the promise of dawn. "Where no one will follow," he said. They traveled that way for days. The land softened, trading stone for dry grass, the air heavy with the scent of rain that never quite fell. They spoke little. The quiet between them had changed not suspicion now, but something cautious and alive. One night, under a sky swollen with stars, she sat close to the fire and said, "You could have gone back. You could have lived." He stared into the flames. "Living's different from breathing." She studied him, then nodded. "Yes, it is." They shared the last of their food. When she smiled, it was faint but real, and for the first time in years, Samuel felt the world shift just enough to let light through the cracks. The desert around them breathed, wide and ancient, and the wind carried the scent of mesquite and rain. Somewhere, far off, thunder rolled like an old god waking slow. He looked at her and thought, perhaps the land could forgive what men could not. They followed the storms west, where the land rose into jagged ridges, and the air smelled of iron and wet clay. For days, the sky broke open and closed again, lightning painting the mesas in fleeting color. Nolly moved through it as though born of the storm, quiet, deliberate, her eyes fixed on paths only she could see. Samuel followed, his horse limping from old wounds, his body heavy with the ache of everything left behind. By the third night, they found shelter in a canyon where the rain gathered in pools at the base of the stone walls. She built a small fire in a hollow, shielding it with flat rocks. The light threw gold across her face, the flames reflected in her eyes. Samuel sat apart, watching her as one might watch a sunrise after too many nights awake. He said, "You could go on without me." She did not look up. "And you?" "I'd keep riding until the horse gave out." "Then what?" she asked, her tone even, not mocking. "Then I'd walk," he said, and something about the honesty of it drew a small smile from her. They ate in silence smoked rabbit, a few wild roots she had dug from the earth. Rain whispered against the stone, and in that sound he felt something familiar and long lost. Not comfort exactly, but peace trying to remember itself. When the storm eased, Nolly lifted her head toward the canyon rim. "Listen," she said. He strained to hear. The desert beyond was still, save for the drip of water and the low hum of wind moving through the stone. "What is it?" he asked. "The world," she said softly. "It keeps breathing, even when we wish it wouldn't." Her words lingered in the space between them. He thought of the men he'd killed, the orders he'd followed, the lives that had unraveled because he had done as told. The ache in his chest was not guilt alone. It was the ghost of a faith he had once carried. The belief that right and wrong could be measured cleanly. Now all he saw was dust. Later, when the fire died to embers, she spoke again. "When I was a child, my mother told stories of the white men who came with crosses and guns. She said some came with open hands, others with open mouths. All wanted to take something." She looked at him, her expression calm, almost sad. "Which one are you, Samuel?" He could not meet her eyes. "I don't know anymore." "Then you are still choosing," she said. He slept little that night. The rain came and went, and dreams crowded his head, faces blurred by smoke. A little girl at a doorway, her hands outstretched toward him before the sky turned red. When he woke, the fire was out, and Nolly was gone. Panic hit him like a kick to the ribs. He rose, scanning the canyon. Her footprints led toward the upper trail, half-washed by rain. He followed them until the path opened to a ridge overlooking the valley. She stood there, bow slung across her back, hair whipping in the wind. At her feet lay a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "What is that?" he asked. She turned slowly. "My mother's beads. For burial. This is where she fell." He stopped short. "You brought me here on purpose." She nodded. "You needed to see what your orders did." Samuel's throat closed. The land below was scarred with old fire, black patches spreading like disease across the earth. He could almost see the soldiers, their torches, the screams swallowed by wind. His own regiment had been near this valley. He remembered the smoke on the horizon, the laughter that followed. He had not come to look. He had ridden on. "I can't undo it," he said. "I know," she replied, "but you can stop carrying it as if it still owns you." He sank to his knees, his hand gripping the cold stone. The wind bit his face, and for a long time neither spoke. Then, quietly, she began to sing, low, steady, the words strange to him but full of sorrow that stretched beyond language. The sound of it seemed to lift the dust, to turn grief into something almost holy. When she finished, she turned to him. "There is a place north of here, past the canyons, where my people go when the soldiers come. You could stay there a while. They would not hurt you if I asked them." He met her gaze. "You'd trust me that much?" "I would test you," she said. "Trust comes later." He almost smiled. "That sounds fair." They descended the ridge together, the sky brightening with a pale morning sun. The storm had left the desert clean and new, every stone glistening. Samuel felt the ache in his body, the bruises, the hunger, the quiet pull of something he could not yet name. For the first time in many years, he wanted to live not for orders or duty, but for the small chance that forgiveness might be real. That night, as they camped beside a narrow creek, Nali sat close enough that their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. The firelight touched the lines of her face, softening them. She said nothing, and neither did he. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of rain and memory, and the faint hum of two souls learning how to breathe again. They reached the foothills where the desert began to yield to sparse pine and shale, the air cooler and the sky a deeper blue. The land changed its language here. The wind no longer hissed, it sighed. Samuel's horse stumbled once and went down to its knees. He dismounted and led it the rest of the way, hand on its neck, murmuring the old words men use when they owe a beast more than they can pay. Nali walked ahead, light on her feet. She carried her bow in one hand, the string slack, and paused now and then to listen not just for danger, but for the sound of water hidden in stone. The trail narrowed to a path between cliffs streaked with color, red and gold and white like dried blood. The sun was low by the time they found the narrow pass that opened into a green hollow cupped by the hills. There were huts of woven willow and stone, a dozen at most, their smoke rising thin and pale. Children's laughter drifted faintly, the sound unsure, as if they were still deciding whether joy was safe to speak aloud. When the first of the people saw Nali, they came running. An old woman pressed her hands to Nali's face, murmuring in their tongue, her voice breaking on the edges of relief. A man stepped forward, tall, his shoulders straight despite the scars that ran along his arms. His gaze fell on Samuel, wary but not cruel. "This one came with me," Nali said. The man looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "If you bring him, then he walks in peace." Samuel bowed his head slightly. "I don't deserve that." The man studied him. "Deserve has little to do with peace." Then he turned away and called for food to be brought. They were given a small hut near the stream. The walls smelled of cedar and smoke, and furs lined the floor. Nali tended to the horse, speaking softly to it as she rubbed its legs with ointment made from crushed leaves. Samuel watched her through the open flap, the ease of her hands, the grace she carried even in the simplest act. He thought again of the letter folded in his coat and what it had once meant to cleanse, to control, to erase. He took it out that night and fed it to the fire. The flame caught quick, flared, then faded. When she returned, she found him watching the last curl of smoke. "You burned your orders," she said. "I did. What will you do now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe find a way to build something instead of burying it." She studied him for a long moment. Then you should learn to make walls that hold against the wind. He smiled faintly. You'll have to show me. In the days that followed, he worked beside her people. They built corrals of stone and gathered water from the creek. He learned to grind corn between flat rocks, to mend a roof with woven willow. He spoke little, but the rhythm of work settled into him like a prayer. When night came, he and Nolly sat by the fire, and sometimes she told him old stories: the coyote who tricked the sun, the river that fell in love with the moon. Her voice wove through the dark like smoke, gentle and strong. Weeks passed before trouble came. Riders again, this time more of them, cutting across the valley in a straight line of dust. Soldiers. Samuel saw their flags before anyone else. His blood went cold. They were searching still, perhaps for him, perhaps simply for conquest's sake. It no longer mattered which. He went to the hut and took up his rifle. Nally caught his arm. If you fight them, they will kill you, and they will find us. I can lead them away, he said. Her grip tightened. And then what? You die somewhere alone, and they come again next season. That is not how you end a war. Her words cut him open, but she was right. He lowered the rifle slowly. Then what do we do? She looked toward the mountains. There is a way through the old pass. The people will hide there until the riders are gone. But someone must cover the tracks. I'll do it. She shook her head. No, we do it. They worked through the night, dragging brush across the paths, leading the horses upstream to break the scent. By dawn, the valley looked untouched, only wind and stone. The riders passed within sight but never slowed. When the last echo of hooves faded, Nally turned to him and smiled, small but full of light. You have learned something, she said. He looked at her, dust on her face, sweat on her brow, and felt something inside him settle, a stillness he had not known since before the killing. Maybe, he said, maybe I've learned how to stay. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the two of them stood by the creek. She reached into her pouch and drew out a small stone carved with the shape of a bird. My mother carried this when she walked through fire, she said. Now it belongs to you. He hesitated, then took it. I'll keep it close. Do not keep it, she said softly. Carry it until you understand it, then pass it on. He nodded, unable to speak. The air was cool, the sky soft with violet and rose. A coyote called from the ridge, and the sound felt less like sorrow now, more like promise. They stood together until the stars came. The world had not forgiven them, not yet, but it had stopped pushing them away. Samuel turned to her, voice low. Maybe someday we build those cottonwoods after all. She looked up at him, the faintest curve of a smile on her lips. Then we will need good soil. He reached for her hand. Her fingers closed around his, rough and warm. The wind moved through the valley, and the creek murmured like the start of a song. Far above, the first stars blinked awake, patient, enduring, as if the heavens themselves waited to see what love could grow from ruin.